We made it. We're finally getting to our honey fermented haroset here. As I talked about before, when I saw just all the different possibilities for recipes in a haroset, I wanted to incorporate a lot of those things into what I made, and not just limit it to the apples, cinnamon, walnuts, and wine that I'm accustomed to. And there's plenty of other things that can go into a haroset. I mean, it could be bananas, it could be thyme. I read that the herb thyme is used in a form of Yemenite haroset that kind of represents the straw that would go into mortar. So there's certainly other options than this. It's almost the sky is the limit. But these were items that I had in some other harosets that I just really enjoyed and felt went really nicely together. So we can see here I have my date nectar, of course the raw honey, and I have a few different types of apples, a Pink Lady, a Granny Smith, and a Fuji. And I've got that wine that I made a few years back that I talked about before. And I'm just going to use a couple tablespoons of that, and then the other liquid will come from this half a pomegranate. Some spices, cardamom, cinnamon, allspice, cloves. I'm going to throw a couple cinnamon sticks in there too, and then just give it a little kick with a little bit of cayenne pepper as well. My ginger, took off just a little bit of the skin just to avoid some of the potential woodiness, but it's a nice young ginger, and through the fermentation process it would be fine to leave the peel on, but it's just what I do. And got my dates here and my apricots and figs, and they're all totally organic, unsulfured, and that way I'm not worried about anything going wrong with my ferment. And then I also wanted to show here, I mean, this is actually the honey fermented haroset I made a couple years ago, and we're going to take a look at that. I had a lot more, but I would just eat a little bit at a time that was left over, and moved it into smaller containers, and I've had this in my fridge, and it's really quite delicious. I'll open that up for you. You can see that there. I'm going to stir it up a little bit, just bring it back to life a little bit. When I stir it up, you can see it's still quite moist and glistening, and it's not dry at all, except for maybe just the exterior edge can get a little bit dry. But it's as good as the day I made it, as far as, I mean, it doesn't smell bad, it smells great. I'm going to have a bite right now. You can see a nice big piece of date right there. And, I mean, this has really transformed now into something like a really rich, deeply flavored chutney. It's just amazing. It probably just gets better with age. A little crunchiness to it from the pistachios I have in there. It's hard to see, see that at this point, but they're in there. It's just got a lot of really great flavors going on, but they've also really melded together. There's just so much going on with the flavor. I can't wait for you to try this. At this point, before we go any further, I'm just going to put the recipe up here so you can see it. And it's available at my blog anytime for free at insaneinthebrine, BRINE.com. And the rest of this video is going to give you the demonstration of how it's made. Something I'm thinking about doing with my old haroset, what's left of it, is rolling it into balls and then rolling it around in some sesame seeds. And we'll finish it up this year as a really special little haroset on the side we can have. And then as far as this wine, you don't need to make your own wine. This is a mixed berry wine. Again, you can use any red wine. You could use a kosher for Passover red wine. If you're strict about those things, you could get some Manischewitz from the store. We're just talking a couple tablespoons, so there's really nothing to worry about adding that to your ferment. All right, so I've got the apples done. I'm just going to go ahead and put them in a large mixing bowl. Apricots. The figs, I'm going to just cut the stem off, so we don't run into that later. Biting down on it's not always too fun. The figs and the dates. Got my dates done. It's probably my favorite part. Got everything in my bowl now. And I'm going to start adding my spices and liquids and save the honey for the end when I have everything in the jar already. Half a teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon ground clove, half a teaspoon cardamom. It's not in my recipe on my blog, but I'm going to put a 1/4 teaspoon of allspice. The cayenne powder is optional, and the recipe calls for about a teaspoon, but with my family I'm just going to go for half a teaspoon just to give it a little something. Have a nub of ginger. It's about 30 grams, give or take. Ginger. For the pomegranate juice, I'm just going to use my lovely juice press here. My recipe calls for about 2 tablespoons of the pomegranate juice, and I think this is going to be just perfect. Close enough. A couple tablespoons of my berry wine. I am not going to put the pistachios for the ferment. I repeat that. I don't put the nuts in for the ferment. I'm going to add them later. The oils in the nuts are a worry for me, and I just want to maintain their crunchiness, and so I'm going to go ahead and add the nuts in when the ferment is over and I'm ready to start refrigerating this. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a nice mix before I get it in my jar. Really evenly mixed up. The smell on this is just amazing. It's so floral and fruity and delicious smelling. I'm looking here and I could imagine other things going in, like raisins or other dried fruit, dried cherries or cranberries. But this is the recipe as I have at my blog, insaneinthebrine.com, and so this is just an exact repeat of that. One other item, I could add it in at this point, or in the jar is my date syrup. It's optional. Several things in here, I mean, you could do or not do, but particularly the spices, but I would do a couple tablespoons of these, and it's just delicious. Date syrup or date nectar was heavily used in the ancient Near East, and probably for a recipe just like this, so I feel like it adds a great flavor, texture, and it's going to just really enhance the overall final product. Give it one more quick mix. I'll show you that in some better lighting. I mean, it's funny, just as it is, if we were to just let this sit for a day or two in the fridge, it would be an incredible haroset as is, but we're going to make it even more interesting with the honey component, which we will do now. For the drying part, I'm going to use my canning funnel just to make life a little easier on me. We're getting there. The jar done, isn't that beautiful? Now let's take care of the honey. It's going to be around 2 pounds or possibly more if desired. We won't in the end end up using all of that. We're going to strain it out when it becomes really liquidy before serving this. And I'll show that as the very last part of this project. It's our first pound. And as that honey starts to make its way down, I'm going to go ahead and add the second pound. And that honey is just like right there. But it's going to continually seep down, and we're going to take another look at this tomorrow. We'll give it about maybe just 12 hours and see what it looks like at that point. Well, that's about as far as we're going to get for today, so I'm going to enjoy some of my wine and a little snack here, and we'll check this out tomorrow. Oh, and one more thing before I go. I'm not going to leave this uncapped. I'm going to just put a plastic lid on it. Doesn't need to be super tight or anything. I'm just going to keep it covered, of course, and we will check on that tomorrow. So it's been a day, and I mean, actually within a few minutes of the last filming, all of the honey had sunk down, and now today is February 13th, so I've got about 5 or 6 weeks until Passover, so this is going to ferment until then. It doesn't need to be that long, but you know, I would suggest at least a few weeks. And I'm just going to stir this once a day for a little while until things start to submerge themselves. Just move things around so that the surface also gets pushed underneath the honey, and things get to share some time up in the at the top there, and that's really about it. So I'm going to come back to this and show you the final result right when we're about to process this for our final form. Well, I'm just going to show a couple shots here of how this changes from the course of like February to the end of March or April when you have Passover and we eat this. The weather starts warming up, at least here in Atlanta, that's what's happening, and you really start to see this thing come alive. It doesn't do this at the beginning, but you keep stirring it, And if you don't see this happening after a few weeks, you add a couple tablespoons of water. But this is a typical sign, and others who have made this experience the same thing. It's quite awesome. And here we are. We've arrived at straining day. And you can use any bowl and fine mesh strainer. You don't have to use this whole contraption I have. I use that for cheese making and other things, but it kind of worked well for this. But whatever you use to pour your haroset mix into to let it strain out, just let it take its time. That took me about 10 minutes just to get all of the honey that was going to come out. I worked it with a wooden spoon some to help, get that through. Pulled out the cinnamon sticks that are still in there. Those are really tasty, by the way. Got my pistachios going. That was 6 ounces. Could be other nuts, walnuts, or pecans, or a mix. But I like to use these pistachios. They're salted and roasted. That adds a really nice flavor. That's all the honey I had at the end, about at least 2 cups worth. And I'll show you something in a little bit that I did with that a couple of years ago. And there's the haroset. Just need to put the pistachios on. You can see it's nice and kind of, it's not dry, but it doesn't have that whole lake of honey in it. You just want to fold the pistachios in. And in the pistachio, I ground it up with you could use a food processor, would be great, or chop it with a knife, but I use my blender. So some of it got powdery, and that actually worked really well. It really created that kind of mortar consistency that we've talked about as far as haroset representing the mortar of the slaves building. So that worked really well. There's the honey. And 2 years ago, I used that honey to make a haroset mead, and there it still is. I have yet to taste it. It's taken a lot of willpower, but I've gotten to smell it, and I've racked it, and it just smells great. I'm going to probably open that this year. And there's the haroset. And then you saw it before, but I have my haroset from a couple of years ago, what's left of it. And I mentioned I wanted to roll them into bowls with the sesame seeds. So I did that. And let's take a look at what I got. The mint from my garden was just starting to come up when I made that. So I kind of garnished it with that a little bit. And I just love how it came out. And there's the haroset, the whole thing before it's been touched, before it's been eaten. I just love how it came out, and I hope you do too. Well, I've gone ahead and made a little sample of the Hillel sandwich with the maror we made in the last video, and the haroset I just finished up a little earlier today. And the two of them just look great. I'm so excited to try this. This is the first one of the season. I hope y'all can try this spring. This is like quintessential spring food in the ancient Near East, and I just know it's going to be good, but I can't wait to try it. Give you a little close-up there. Just look at all the things that went into that. The apples, the dates, figs, apricots, the pistachios, all the spices, the cinnamon, the wine, the pomegranate juice. There's just so much going on in there. I'm so excited. Then we put a lot of love into this as well with the beet and the horseradish, a little bit of salt and sugar and vinegar. It's all going to just come together. I know I'm going to love it, but here's the moment of truth right here. That is what we call the Hillel sandwich. All right, here we go. The flavors just work together so well. There was so much honey and sweet things in there, but with everything else together, it's like nothing overpowers anything. It's a little bit salty, it's a little bit sour and bitter and sweet, and it all just works together perfectly. And I don't know if there's any other flavor quite like this. It just brings up a lot of memories for me. Even though this is a different preparation of haroset than what's customary in most places, it still has this kind of quintessential haroset flavor that shines through. So I love it, and it still really gives me that feeling of a Hillel sandwich, even though this haroset I do not see being made elsewhere. I hope you give it a try, and I hope you like it as much as I do, and I hope you have a great spring. Thank you.